The Secret Garden, Chapter 2. Now, what are my thoughts about this? Well, in Chapter 1, we learned that Mary was from India, that her family there died, and her servants, and she had nobody to take care of her. So in Chapter 2, we learned that she, at first, was that when someone discovered that she was there, that she was first taken to an English clergyman's house. Uh, she didn't like that, but she doesn't like much, so that's not to be too surprising. But he had 5 kids, and they were all kind of dirty and shabby clothes and quarreling and snatching toys from each other. And I think we get the opinion that Mary was a little bit of a snob, and we could understand that. She was an aristocrat in England. I mean, in India, but the boy in the family, just particularly, she and the boy tangled just terribly much. And they had a quarrel. He called her Mistress Mary, quite contrary, which is an English nursery rhyme. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? That's a nursery rhyme. And so she didn't like Basil, and he didn't like her. And he got mad at her, and he said, "We're going to be sent home," Basil said to her, "at the end of the week, and we're glad of it." And Mary was baffled. Where's home? You may not realize it at that point, but that is the overarching question in this book. Where is home? I write a lot about home and the need for a home and our search for a home. It's almost Buddhist, a yearning for a home, and that is the question. It's not just a physical place, I don't believe, but it is an emotional home. The book goes to great detail in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 to show that Mary was neglected and she had no emotional home. She had a place to live, but she had no home. In fact, she asked the question, I don't understand why nobody wants me. Why I don't have anyone who wants me for their own, basically was her question. So anyway, so Basil, just to make matters worse, he said, and she's going to go live with a man. His name is Mr. Archibald Craven. He's a horrid man. He has a hunchback, and he lives in a gloomy, horrid house. Well, Mary played like she wasn't listening, but she was listening. Soon, an officer's wife who was taking her children to England this was a time of British colonialism, and there were a lot of English people in various colonies. A lot of them were detailed or associated with the army or the military in these countries, like in Africa India was one. I don't even know right now, but I do know Africa. Out of Africa is sort of reflects that British colonialism. But anyway, so an officer's wife was taking her, so these people had roots in England, although they lived in India or Africa, would it be, their roots were still England, most of them. And so this officer's wife was taking her children to leave them in a boarding school. So she was delegated the responsibility of carrying or chaperoning more or less Mary as she crossed the ocean to get to London, from India to London. And she was met there by a lady named Mrs. Medlock. One of the main reasons that I study literature and especially kid lit is to see how different people use the use description. And I think the description of Mrs. Medlock is fairly good. She was a stout woman with very red cheeks and sharp black eyes. She wore a very purple dress, a black silk mantle with jet fringes on it, and a black bonnet with purple velvet flowers which stuck up and trembled when she moved her head. I think that's pretty good. Okay, when Mrs. Medlock meets the officer's wife, the conversation is what it always is about Mary. She surely is a horrid-looking kid, or child. She's not very pleasant at all. She's just downright ugly. She's so unpleasant. And the officer's wife says something that I think is foreshadowing. What is foreshadowing? Foreshadowing is when something is dropped in a story that makes you believe that it's going to be mentioned again somewhere else. It's a kind of an Easter breadcrumb, Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb. It's a breadcrumb that are a path. It's a beginning of a path towards something that is going to happen later on. So what the officer's wife said, if she weren't so sallow and had a nicer expression, her features are rather good. Children alter so much. Perhaps she will improve as she grows older. So everybody thinks she's just horrid and terrible and nasty and just unsalvageable, but perhaps she will improve as she grows older. And that suggestion lingers in this chapter. Is something about to turn around. But here again we see Mary being a little snob. She was mutual dislike. Mrs. Medlock disliked Mary, and Mary disliked Mrs. Medlock. And again, it was kind of a snobby thing. She thought she was too plain, too crass, and so even walking through the railway station toward the carriage, Mary walked behind her. She didn't want anybody to she didn't want anybody to think that was her mother. So she stayed far behind. So anyway, and before Mrs. Medlock had made the journey to meet Mary, her employer, Mr. Archibald Craven, told her that Captain Lennox, who was a captain in the British military in India, was his wife's brother. We go on to find out that Archibald Craven was terrible and dreadful, but he did have one love, and he lost that love, and it made him even more remote and more angry and sour. So anyway, let's see how Mary's dressed. We know how Mrs. Craven's dressed, with that purple feather or whatever, black bonnet, or the purple feather or whatever that stands up and shouts hallelujah when she moves. Okay, what is Mary wearing? She had folded her thin little black gloved hands in her lap. This is when she's sitting on the railway carriage. Her black dress made her look yellower than ever, and her limp, light hair straggled from under her black crepe hat. Black. Why would a child be wearing black? Black is the darkness. It is to represent who she is at this point. She's a dark little girl. She has dark history. She seems to have dark future unless things change. Okay. Now, so Mrs. Craven is kind of a busybody and kind of talk, and she says, "You're going to a great big place," which is gloomy in a way, but Mr. Craven's proud of it. And that's gloomy enough, too. The house is 600 years old and it's on the edge of the moor. And there's near 100 rooms in it, though most of them shut up and locked. Mary didn't know what a moor was, but it sounded dreadful to her, to big, ugly, gloomy house on the edge of whatever that is, a moor. And she said, and then Mrs. Medlock goes on and on and on to tell Mary what a miserable situation she's getting herself into. And she said, don't count on seeing Mr. Archibald Craven, your uncle. He spends all of his time locked up in a room on the west wing. He shuts himself up and he won't let anyone in except an older man named Pitcher. Pitcher's an old fellow, but he took care of Mr. Craven when he was young, and he and Craven have a bit of an understanding, I guess. So Mary is not happy. She sits in the corner of the railway car and stares out the window, and things are looking gloomy for her. And